I'm Kesh Hirani. I'll tell you a bit more about myself, and I'll let every panelist tell a bit more about themselves, but I'll also tell you why I picked, or I had some choice in picking the panelists. But first, about myself. I've been in video games industry about 21 years now. Started off as a programmer, and then pretty much, I think that was my first 2 years in the video games industry, based in the UK. And then became a technical director in equivalent positions and worked for companies like BBC, THQ, Acclaim, and then finally settled on platform holders. Started with Microsoft. I was doing a lot of contracting work, mainly DirectX, and then jumped onto Sony for 8 years straight. And that brings us to 1.5 years ago when they made the position redundant. And so now I'm self-employed and do a lot of consultancy work. How my Sony part of work is relevant to the topic up here in terms of VR and why I'm asked to host this. Well, the last 5 years, so it's coming to 6 years now, but the 5 years of my Sony life was involved with Morpheus, which became PlayStation VR. So pretty much, I think I would say roughly month 3 or so when the Santa Monica team and the US R&D team came up with this is not top secret whatsoever. It was definitely a year ahead of anything which was publicly announced, and the excitement of VR came out in the market. And credit to Oculus, as soon as they went public, this is when we internally said, wow, we've got a vertical slice of a product which looks amazing. We need to announce this as well. But anyway, so that's my background. I'm going to say very quickly, so we've got Sarah, Dominic, Chad, and Vlad. I will summarize every single person on this stage as I'm very, very similar in that sense, but every single person, we've got indies and platform holders over here, but every single person wants to help developers, irrelevant of what background they are, if it's a one-man team to a largest studio ever you can think of, a largest publisher. Most of these guys I've known personally as that sort of one person you can approach to in a large monolithic organization, who you don't know to approach to, and just that friendly approach. So although I didn't have a lot of say of who turns up on the panel, but I think I can very confidently say every single person I know here, they're more than happy to share everything they've learned to you. So I'm going to start with Sarah, and then we go across, and you can introduce yourself more formally on what amazing stuff you do.
So, I'm Sarah, and I'm into VR. Like the last 3 years, I was spending time in Hamburg with the VR Nerds Collective, like experimenting with a lot of motion input, tracking, feedback systems, stuff like that, like playing around a lot. And we have this, we had this news blog, VR Nerds.de, where they're sharing insights in the scene. So that's what I did, but now I'm very happy that I moved to Berlin, and I'm setting up VR Base Berlin here, which is a European accelerator program. No, that's not an accelerator program. I cannot even explain it at the moment. It's an incubator hub. It's really European. We have different capitals in there, like Amsterdam, Berlin. Paris is coming, also Barcelona is developing, and then a whole more European cities we're thinking of making this work, like building this up, to also gather much more developers and all that enthusiasm in the VR scene, that we give that a base, actually.
Cool. Right. So my name is Dominic. I'm a virtual reality enthusiast by heart. This one's working, huh? I've been involved in the VR industry for a couple of years now, so my first experience with VR was the Oculus Rift prototype, back when it was still a piece of ski goggles, literally a phone screen held together with duct tape. And ever since then, I became a huge VR enthusiast. I think it's one of those big medias that's going to change how we interact with computers. And my background was, I'm a community person, so I founded one of the largest communities on the web, which is the Oculus subreddit. And then through my community involvement, we also got together as meetup organizers and founded a non-profit organization called EUVR. I'm going to do shameless plugs for EUVR here. it's meant to help Europe grow in a sense in terms of virtual reality development. And I also was part of a startup called Realities.io, which we brought through an accelerator in Silicon Valley. And when I came back, I took the role of taking care of the European virtual reality business for NVIDIA. So I'm through and through a virtual reality nerd.
Hi, I'm Jeff Alsek. I work at Valve. Previously, I used to make games, and now I work with third-party developers.
Hey, I'm Vladimir. I like VR enthusiast as well. I did a lot of stuff like last years, like interaction design and games, and at the moment, like I focused on VR. I'm running a meetup here in Berlin about like art VR stuff, like creative projects, like mostly focused on experimental things like art or like kind of like psychedelic or like indie VR porn experiences. So yeah, if you're into this underground VR, like you can ask me anything.
We want to have a party
Excellent.
soon
Yep.
to that, right? We want to also have a party soon with that topic in VR.
Yeah, we're gonna
Space
have
Berlin.
a indie VR porn party sometime.
If anyone is interested in that, you can sign up after the panel.
So by the way, the link is working, and as soon as he said indie VR porn, suddenly questions started coming on. No. Actually, so one of the things, keep the questions very precise, because it's actually, there's no way I'll be able to read if you're going to write there's a beautiful essay here, which I will be able to read. Okay, so I'll get started. So one of the things, let's start now. And you know, I'm very wary of when you put a sort of a 10-bait title like that, where people are hoping everything we'll discuss is telling you what will make you the next biggest indie title ever. And we are going to get to that, because that's what these guys are going to love to tell you. So 6 years ago, Sony, I'm going to start with just the current of where the vision was, and just saying what you guys think of what really worked. So it was a very simple, because nobody knew VR, but academia-wise, Army, and a few other technologies, I think at Sony we were talking to NASA and them, and a couple of things which were very obvious. I mean, the first thing straight away, which you don't talk about, but everybody internally had to talk about, is nausea and sickness. How are you going to prevent that? What's the science where we know technology-wise we'll be able to nail this in 4 years' time when we'll release the product. So one of the three game genres, yes, came up as a very easy for internal teams who were instructed to prototype was cockpit-based games. So anything where there's a frame around while you're in the VR world, so racing cars, cockpit fighters, there are a number of other examples, but it works. You don't have to spend a lot of time then prototyping, because that's good enough, and get going and you're making a game. The second one was a remote view. And this actually was amazing, because people came up with some. So remote view is effectively just the way you are standing. I think Chad gave a very good example of Godzilla view. You're standing up, although nobody ever is Godzilla. But remote control racing car games, drones, and Dungeons and Dragons, anything which is asymmetric gaming, where you can actually now look up and down, because that's what you're generally used to in real world, sort of looking at things. That worked. You don't have to put too much of effort while technology was catching up and all the other latencies, etc., were being figured out. So you could start prototyping on that. And third one was rail-based, so roller coaster, anything which you're guided through, so you're not got any other movements or so. So what effectively you have a control over is the headset, and you're moving your head around. And so those are the three which were set. Now, just to you guys, what else, which I might have missed, but what worked, what's worked right now, what's been successful, and was this a good assumption to start with, to say, stick to that?
Okay. Because I think it's helpful when panels are contrary, so I'll just start off being super contrary, that we would dismiss all three of those.
Yep.
Well, first, the one thing is, we think the most important thing about VR is that you can be immersive, that you can actually be in a scene in a way that you never could have before, that you yourself, it's no longer an avatar, it's no longer abstraction. So everything we've always worked on is about removing that abstraction. Even playing things that are abstracted, it was still about making it different and feeling that way. But we've always found, we thought, the worst stuff that we've seen continually made is stuff that people are told to make, or that somebody comes up on a design board and decides this is what we're going to go do, and then they stick to it. The best stuff is Unity and Unreal are super easy to use. Jump in, start playing around, make a prototype. Everything we've ever created comes from somebody screwing around, making a prototype with just one simple idea. You find the kind of the thing that works, and then you run with that. And I think of some of the most successful games like Space Pirate Train or Audio Shield, like all of those kind of come from that same thing of like, why VR? Well, because I can be immersed, I'm in the space, I'm the person, then what can I do? And then to start prototyping and working around that. And we found that to be really where the interesting stuff comes from.
I also think it's more about like looking at things or something, but also what is really like developing much more is that procedure stuff, and also, for example, the particle stuff, like from Richard Baxter, this thing like Trip the Light Fantastic, thinks into this direction, and also what Flood is doing, like with his, like, it's very little interaction actually, but you also don't move yourself, but the world around you moves kind of, but you actually, like you do stuff to move it, but very abstract. Like, for example, in one of your prototypes, I lifted up and down a controller, and therefore the whole world changed somehow. Like, I was in this huge mushroom field, and I was just feeling happy, like flying around, waving things around me. So
I think it's like a good point, like that. I spoke with a lot of movie people, and they basically, I realized this thing that in movies, like the only one way you can affect the watcher is like by emotional drama, and like people are really good at it, and they just develop this whole like genre, and like they're really good at it. But in VR, you don't. I mean, it's cool when you have it, but you don't necessarily need that. You like. I like the experiences which are based on like physical interactions, and this interactions not necessarily should be realistic. They could be like abstract, and this is like something new, and which is like only possible in VR. And it's like I really like to see where it develops, because like I'm seeing more and more people experimenting in that.
I would also say the key takeaway, what works, is that physical interaction in any kind of form, even in the most obvious playfulness kind of way, is something that definitely works in VR. So the examples we just had, there are other examples like Bubble Labs, for example, or Cosmic Sugar, where you're essentially just interacting with a particle cloud, and it's just fun. It's just something which you can't do in other types of media. So that is the key takeaway: is just to be a playful nature. So things like Job Simulator or The Incredible Machine. Fantastic Contraption, thanks. Those were prime examples of those kind of interactivities where there's nothing much happening apart from that. But as long as you're interacting and you're an agent in the world, being able to change things, that's a major takeaway for me.
So, but that's, oh sorry, but that's definitely true, and that works, and that is fun. But that's also now somehow like, yeah, that's cool, but it's a bit too less. Like, people are talking about it more like, yeah, that's a tech demo recently. Yeah. So it's not really like a real experience, but yeah, it's a cool prototype, it's a cool tech demo, like two things like that, for example, like it's getting into this direction.
So that's actually, it's almost you planted this. So what happened then is basically Sony Studios just said, that's great for tech demos. So you had shark cages and using a science to make games, basically. So all those formulas were put in. And then all that was dismissed, and then you get the London Heist, where they started using on emotions, and I'm planting the next discussion item already on this. But the London Heist was a classic one. What's amazing right now in VR is you can really make it intimidating for somebody by just going right to their face and then talking to them, and Sarah hates that. And things like that, you could do that in VR, so let's start experimenting. So now I'm going to move on to, I'm hoping you'll start with what's already been done amazingly well, rather than saying this is, I'm still expecting people to experiment with, because I don't think it's been done well. But let's go on to both as well. So is there any way emotion? I'll give you some of the examples which I sort of planted earlier on. And I'm not going to take credit for this, because the most amazing, beautiful example you can think of, it was guys at Sony, some amazing designer thought of this. But think of Indiana Jones. It's in VR, I mean, in gaming as well, it's very easy. Everybody knows the movie, so you know the character. you play a video game and you know you're going to be having a weapon running around playing a 2D game on a sort of 2D screen or so. In VR, as soon as you put in the visor and you're told you're Indiana Jones and you've still got the same movements, etc., you're suddenly, yes, great, I'm Indiana Jones. You've almost cut that sort of storyline to tell somebody, yes, you are Indy. But then what next? I mean, in VR, it's possible that we can actually amplify emotions or so. So how are you going to make somebody, because although, and I'm going to ask whether do you care, is it important, and do you guys care? How do you tell somebody you are from day one as you're starting the game, you fear snakes? Because that's, everybody knows that, Indy does that, and I think in traditional game nobody cares, or if a snake comes along, I mean, you will just shoot it or something. But you want to add that sort of extra sort of emotions, which it's possible in VR. So I'm using that. I'm same with Batman again. You know, how do you induce sort of those thoughts of you miss your parents and everything else? Because it is possible, and there's some sort of ways you can actually by gameplay do this. So I'm going to see emotions. Have you seen some good games? Have you worked on things which are tapping very well into human emotions, which wasn't possible in traditional gaming?
Also, what I can just say is, like, at the last VR meetup in Hamburg, I was totally blown away by this 3D sound installation. Like, they had this puppy there, and people were whispering in her ears. And I have this friend, and he really tricked me into that, like being a super creep, just behind my back, and then shouting in front of my face. And this just, like, I closed my eyes and imagined it being VR. So something like that I really want to see, like, doing really great recorded spatial sound and then live, like, have emotions transferred with a lot of acoustics with it, like sound.
So, I mean, I think one of the things where, especially when we see, like, Hollywood says that they're going to come to VR and tell stories in VR because game people don't know how to tell stories, and then they struggle and ignore all the stuff that we've done in games for years. And I think a lot of what the storytelling in VR becomes interesting is when people learn those lessons from the game people. I always use the example of, I don't know if anyone's played Portal 2. At the end, you shoot the moon, everybody does it. 6 months before we released, nobody did it. They didn't shoot the moon because it was obvious we had to build that into it, right? It's part of the storytelling in games. You put a lot of stuff in the environment. You do a lot of hinting. You do a lot of setup so that when that moment comes, they do the right thing. And we're just, I think a lot of games right now are just scratching on that in VR. Like, I think you can't ever tell somebody they're scared of snakes. That's just, they're not going to do that. What you can do is you can put somebody in a mood, you can put somebody in an experience where they become that. I mean, that's my favorite kind of stories, right? Where you come out of the game and you're not talking about the character, you're talking about you. And how you related to somebody else in that experience. And so, I mean, we're starting to see some stuff like that of, like, if you played, like, Isaac Cohen's, what's the one, I describe it as a loon, where it's like trying to put up a wet tent in the rain kind of feeling, where the story isn't any traditional story, but it's an emotion and a feeling and kind of a vibe that you run with that I think is really kind of just interesting to play with. There's a lot of people doing that kind of thing that I find way more interesting than a traditional kind of set narrative. Loon is the one that you pull the stuff apart overhead. And then
yeah, I also think, like, that emotional could be, like, be represented differently in VR. Like, literally, if you, like, seeing other person. Like, I had this once experience, like, with the large scale VR where you, like, go together with other person and seeing him. Like, and when you have an eye contact, it's like same feeling like you have in real life. But also, like, the other emotions is, like, which giving you the environment and background, and especially when you have, like, abstract world, it's, like, really strange. Like, you can have, like, new experiences which you can't have in real life, which is, like, amazing because, like, that VR gives us this, like, opportunity to experience new things.
And I think some of this also is just, it's early days. Yeah. And so to make something with mature story that has, you know, length to it, that has depth to it, that has, you know, like, all the testing done to get that right and stuff just takes a lot of time. And we're still just scratching at a lot of, and it's kind of one of the problems right now is there's a lot of games that are just mechanics without context. And now we're starting to see some people add context to those mechanics and kind of extend it out and make it more kind of what you would consider a traditional game and see that going there.
I'm keen on, especially indies, and fairly aware of having limited resources. I'm in academia, maybe even visiting a local psychologist on how things work. I don't want to sort of lead too much into the answers of what are the possibilities which people might not be looking at outside where they could tap into, and they would because I mean, everybody's excited about VR, and people, especially people from expertise industries would love to just come in and do almost, I hope it's free, but probably minimal sort of payment or something in terms of consultancy, which would actually make a difference and give you that sort of tool to tap into emotions. Because I don't expect people who write games actually have got a degree in psychology and how to mess around with people's head, but some of you probably will. But I mean, is there any obvious organizations and people you should be really talking to while you're designing your games? Anybody?
For the good or the bad cause?
Sorry?
For the good or the bad cause?
Oh, I don't know.
Organizations who manipulate your brains. I don't know. I'm actually not aware of that. Like, there's not really rules that we can follow or anything. It's more like making it up, having an own like sense of what you don't want someone else to live through, and that kind of stuff. But
And you also want to break conventions to a certain degree in VR, I think. First, when Oculus first put out their best practices guide, I was actually quite happy because they just made a list of things that you have to care about in terms of nausea and motion sickness and all of that. But then in the end, I realized that those types of experience that are actually breaking those best practices to a certain degree are the ones that are more memorable to me than just going down that list and ticking every box and doing everything the right way. So I think there has to be a little bit of leeway in terms of creativity.
Yeah, I mean, we purposely never came up with a best practices list because we thought that was not helpful to developers. Your customers are your best practice. They will give you feedback. They will, your community will give you, feedback on whether something works or not. And we wouldn't have picked some things that things did. Like Onward is a really popular multiplayer combat game. At first blush, I would have not have played it. I would have gone, oh, this is going to make me puke. It has natural motion. Like, it's just going to be bad. It's not. It's really good. He did a bunch of little things in there that officially breaks the rules, but that just totally works, and people dig it and play it a lot.
Maybe just rephrase that. Maybe you guys didn't. So I'm talking about the example I gave. I know it's obvious when you go to somebody's face and start talking. So I mean, are there expertise of in the industry, other industries, psychologists, doctors, your local government, professors, etc., or some divisions in universities you can go and talk to and just say, I want to narrate this game. I want to tap into the right emotion. Because to me, I'm not a games designer, but it wouldn't have been very obvious unless somebody told me, right, if you really want that character who's a big sort of bully, then just get him bigger in front of you and make it very intimidating, because that can tap into your emotions and things. But that's what I mean. Is there any places you should be looking at second opinions of how I should redesign things?
Your customers, your community. You should be playtesting and getting feedback. I mean, one of the problems with VR has been, in the academic circles, they did a bunch of testing for years, right? They've been working in VR for 20 or 30 years. But they were using equipment that they should now redo every single test. Because, there's, for a while, I think it was the Air Force did a test of, does latency matter on input? And their latency test was 550 milliseconds, 450 milliseconds, and 350 milliseconds. Does latency matter then? No, because it is all horrible, right? But when you get to be sub 20 millisecond, all of a sudden it does matter. So there's a bunch of people who actually don't know this stuff. It's not been around long enough for there to be experts that know something more than the people actually out there making it.
I think that if you want to make in VR some particular emotion or anything, I guess it's there is the whole thing about the character design already out there, but in VR it's works maybe slightly different. And also the thing is that I guess it's all about testing, because like if you compare like non-interactive arts and interactive arts, is like the big difference is like, for example, with a movie, you're creating a character and just giving it to people to watch, but in VR or like video games, especially in VR, where you have like in this kind of interaction, you always have to test with the different people and then kind of tweak what like from the classical theory, let's say, towards like how people actually react. And I think nobody knows how stuff works. Like that's basically everyone is saying. There is like, I don't know how they're teaching it in universities, but basically the best thing is just like try and fail. It's not like, because nobody knows. Like I'm seeing like that slowly last year, for example, and like last years, people developed some certain like best practices, but like a lot of things they are not there, like because nobody knows. And the best thing is like just to try it. And it's not that even that. I think a lot of people just overthinking this. It's pretty simple. You just like trying, and it's like straightforward. Something works, something not.
I think it's also like, for example, in VR chat or something, when you come really close to someone, then at the moment it's like very good if people build something in, which is like this inner circle, like the privacy circle, for example, that you don't go through that or something like this. But on the long run, VR is just like another place of like, yeah, getting around. And so maybe also these kind of things fall off or evolutionate or something over time.
So I'll make this now the easy way, and actually somebody has planted a very, so I'm going to give Jan Peters the credit for this, but I was going to ask this, I'll rephrase it in my way. He has asked, is there content in VR which is questionable and concerning? But I want to, as you're answering that, also I want to say, if you're going to tell people what's the next killer app, can we actually help them by telling them what's not the next killer app? It's like, guys, people tried this, it doesn't work or so. But, so I want to include that question in there on what's concerning.
What was the question? I didn't hear the question.
So my question or the one I just read out as well, or both of them? I'll repeat that.
The one we should be answering?
So you're going to answer it too. So Jan Peters has asked, is there VR content that you find concerning?
What is concerning?
Just questionable.
VR content.
Yeah, actually, if you're in the audience, you can probably clarify, because that's why I interpret it as, is there very questionable content? Is that right? Whoever asked the question? Yeah.
I would say like last year I like played a lot of stuff, and I kind of got this vibe that a lot of people trying to jump to this whole VR thing like really fast, and there were like a lot of games which are like super raw and like kind of really like business oriented and like boring in the end. But now I think this year people are like getting more spoiled, and there is like just much more like things to play. And I think people not gonna just like get like whatever games. And I really looking forward to that people will come up with a more like better quality games this year. And like, I mean, it's been like Vive and like Oculus, they've been around for some time, and like I'm looking for like much more interesting games. And also like personally, I'm looking for the games which is like kind of follow this idea of VR only, like things that possible only in VR, because a lot of projects last year, like people just were trying to extend what they know into the VR. Like there are a lot of big games, they were like just like put this VR support on a real game, or like indie game like community, like they tried to make indie games in VR, or movie, like people also tried to make movies in VR the same way they did it, like, and there were like so many projects which kind of like didn't need VR to like. And I guess the most interesting things are actually what like VR only kind of like, and I think this year it will be more, and like because people slowly started to like develop language, and yeah, I don't know, like I think it will be more interesting stuff.
I've recently seen live theater people also back in Saarbrücken in Germany, and they do a lot with that stuff. And so live theater, improvisation theater is also a lot what would make sense in VR, like interacting with each other, like with different people in the room, doing like transporting some story or like doing some story, yeah.
So I'll ask my bit, which was a lot simpler. What doesn't work? I mean, what can you share with the guys to say what clearly doesn't work?
I don't think we know. I mean, you can get people, anything that gets people sick is a bad thing, right? That actually hurts every single developer because then people are scared off of wanting to use it. But other than that, I mean, that's why so on Steam, we purposely removed the green light barrier because we didn't think people, without playing it, would be able to have an understanding of what was being greenlit there. And not enough people had headsets that were going to be voting on it. And so we purposely wanted to kind of accelerate those experiments and kind of let people thrash on designs and try things. And some of them are bad, but that's okay, because often it's in something that's bad, you find like this one thing of like, oh, they do teleportation really cool though in this part of it, or they do this, or, you know, and I think just trying to consume all the VR you can right now is a good way to learn just what works, what doesn't work, and there's pieces and parts, you know, that you'll find, and I still think we don't know what the kind of the killer thing will be that keeps, you know, to be the next thing, or the new paradigm of how people choose to interact, or what they figure out how to do next, right? And so I think you just have to try everything, and I don't think you can say anything besides something that gets you sick, and then that's fair enough to say that that's a failure.
Can I just bring in Vlad here in non-gaming, and is there areas which, again, you find you probably find it questionable, but who the hell cares, or as well as what doesn't seem to work?
Questionable in terms of morality, or like.
Oh, you pick, I guess.
It's a good question, but I guess like in terms of like morality, I've seen a lot of talks where people talking about bad sides of VR and like about harassment in VR, or like what we can actually show, but like. I really can compare it to like, I remember like when 3D printing became big, and like there are always people who kind of afraid of new technology and seeing only bad stuff about it, but there are people always who are excited about technology, like, and now what we see, like there are people printing guns, and also there are people doing like really like nice like art with the 3D print, like I guess VR is like the same. There is nothing there which is like in people already. Like it's just VR is like just a reflection of people's subconsciousness. There is like you can't I don't know, like maybe slowly we will develop some rules what you can't show like in the movies or something, like some but like I guess there are always people who are like skeptical about it, or like who excited.
I think a lot of that probably will be content rating or whatever age rating.
Yeah, but it's already exists in games and movies. Like it's gonna be probably the same.
Because I think there was a talk yesterday I attended who sort of project that if it's usually a 12 plus and it's quite a scary title in 2D or a movie, it's very likely, they don't know yet, but very likely it'll be a 15 in VR, because it's just everything's amplified. But that's what was his opinion.
But the people who do the rating don't actually ever play the games. When you submit a rating, you submit a video content. So unless they play it, how are they going to know that? I question that.
I don't think, the rating board would, and there's lots of amazing rating boards, etc. I can't see VR changing that. If it does, I mean, it makes you more frightened, and suddenly 13 can not handle that sort of level of fright. That would be surprising, but yeah.
I think you really have to like take care with VR, because it's a thing like you have to go through the medium and really understand the medium to make these judgments, because it's like it's so there, like with the sound, with the bad visuals, also like the headsets developing a lot, and it's just I mean there's scary shit out there. We should actually really see to find some kind of maybe also like in education programs for developers, like just some kind of guides what makes sense and what just really scares the shit out of people, which we then can find in the darknet.
So I've been thinking about concerning content, and so far I haven't seen anything. Well, I've also been grown up with the internet, so I probably am not too easily shocked. Right. But there's not much concerning content out there that I've seen, but what I can definitely foresee is a big controversial title that comes out where age rating boards are going to be involved, and probably something like a Saw-like horror game or something like that, I think would lead up to a lot of controversy, and that will definitely happen in the future, because VR, it brings you more into the scene, so it's going to be the same thing as it was with video games all over again, where people who don't understand the medium, who think that it's just a horror simulator or whatever, they are going to cry foul and go to the age rating boards, and then there's going to be a controversy, and it's probably going to sell well because all the mainstream media is going to report about it. But yeah, that's definitely down the line. So it's
another example of slightly overthinking. There were certain teams, I won't mention the names, but you probably know. They tapped on how to tap into emotions and everything. It's like, we know this formula, and movie directors know this. How, you can almost make 60% or 50% at least of your audience cry because of that sort of, you tap into that set of emotions. I said, well, in VR, maybe we shouldn't make sure we don't do that, because that means you have to remove your visor to wipe your eyes, and that's him be losing a customer for 5 seconds or something. So, I mean, there was some crazy overthinking going on or so, which I'm actually glad, because it's just people are taking VR as this is going to be different. There are different challenges in here which you wouldn't have faced. So I'm going to read a question from there, but I promised whoever asked a discussion, not a question, discussion item for the next 5 minutes.
I've worked a little bit on game rating and some discussion about VR and game rating.
Yes.
And one of the big concerns is the difference between a video game where you're separated from the content and the experience you do in VR. You're much more likely to remember a traumatic experience you live in VR as something you live, you'll internalize, that will change your being, than just looking at a screen where there's this disconnect. So I think the concern is much stronger than in video games, because you have long-lasting memories of the experience you've had. So it was just a comment.
Just observation. So Sarah just said she can't distinguish VR and dreams, but she lives in a different lucid level, right? You can plug titles, by the way. I'm going to start a next 5-10 minutes discussion. What would you like the panel to be discussing? So whoever puts their hand up, but if you've put a question on there, you can still put up your hand, Peter. Yes.
Do you think you can do killer VR apps on mobile VR where you don't have positional tracking, you don't have touch controls, or do you think that a proper killer VR app won't be possible without those two elements?
Oh, I mean, I'm an all-time fan of that thing I mentioned before. It's Trip the Light Fantastic. It's actually a thing where you just look at a procedural generated world, and you just you move with head tilt. You tilt your head for going around, and then you actually basically just look at it, but you don't turn or anything, because that's you just look forward and for something, for chill out, for meditation or something. I think that can be used.
All right. So when it was 2013, I think, Michael Abrash had made this list of things that were needed for presence at Steam Dev Days. And the thing that he left off there that we didn't know about at that time ourselves was input, and how much that changed, that ability to touch something in the world and have agency. So while I think you can do mobile things in mobile, I think when people think about VR and they think about the holodeck version of VR where you're interacting into the world and everything, that's a piece you have to have. You also have to have positionally tracked head so that you actually feel agency of your body in the space. Otherwise, you don't. It's just rotational. But I think the bigger thing is you won't, because that's a poor investment. If you want to make the most money in VR, you should make it for the largest addressable market. The largest addressable market right now may be headsets are rotational only, but those will be museum pieces in a couple years as they move to those having positional tracking as well. And then eventually they'll have input. They'll figure out the input thing. If anyone ever shows you a headset that solves some problem, always ask them what the input is, because often they haven't thought of that and there's no input. But that will be the long tail, right? So if you make something that has positionally tracked head, you're in a volume, you have motion controls, you can probably still be selling that game 10 years from now. There's probably still be hardware that's some version of that, or maybe a bigger space, may have better input, but those base things will still exist. If you did it rotational only, those people are gonna have to dig those things out of the closet to experience that. So your shelf life of that product is gonna kind of probably be much shorter. And so that's why we always kind of encourage everybody to look to see, you know, you develop for the high end knowing that that's going to become the mainstream in a year or two. It's a fast-moving industry right now. And so, you know, that's why I think mobile you're not seeing big investments in, because anyone who's going to lay down, you know, $10 million on something can look and go, there's 5 million headsets this year, but, you know, there's not going to be 50 million next year necessarily, right? They're going to move to this other thing.
Yeah, I also think that for a true killer app in VR to come along, it needs to tap into all the different things that the medium has to offer. And hand tracking or motion tracking is something that's super essential for immersion. You have to get the audio right, the hardware has to be on a certain level. And I would even make the argument that maybe eye tracking might be something that is needed for a true killer app where you can interact even more naturally with the virtual environment. And once all of these technicalities are there, and I always compare that to movies, for example. So for the big movies that we are still remembering today, Citizen Kane, for example, a couple of technological things had to happen. So we had to have sound in movies, we had to have camera rigs that could move around, all these different things that made up the piece of content from a technical level are always needed. And so I think mobile will not be the place where the killer app is going to happen, just because the technology just isn't there to tap into VR in the best way possible.
I did want to ask this question before, because I wanted them to answer your question. But define killer app in that, is that maximum number of install base, maximum of revenue? Because surely the mobile devices will probably have the max, well, right now, in terms of the devices sold, I don't know how much money they make, I've no idea of the figures, but if you further define what do you mean by killer, or are you looking at something which is Oscar material? That game is amazing. Not many people will play it, but I thought it was the most amazing game ever. That was the killer game.
I think it's less about revenue and more about something that everyone talks about. A lot of people say
yes.
VR hasn't had its killer game yet. You know, there's lots of cool stuff out there, but there's not been that, oh my God, this is so amazing, I have to go and buy a headset for it. So I think it's that, you know, we're all saying we want games like that to come, and as the budgets go up, as development budgets go up, hopefully that will happen. So it's really, where is that going to come from? And it does sound from the panel like it's going to be at high end at the moment until mobile gets positional tracking and hand tracking as well.
So also to that point, in a fascinating talk yesterday that I gave, I pointed out that I don't think it's like the mobile phone. What was the killer app for that? I would argue it's flexibility, right? Just because we take so few data points and extrapolate and try to say this is how it always is. So we look at the console launches and say, oh, you have to have your, you have to have your Mario, you have to have your Sonic. But do you, right? And I think this is why we're seeing slower growth in virtual reality than other people predicted, the analysts, where I think people in the industry kind of had this understanding that, if you demo for enough people, we used to demo 10 different individual things. Out of those, one of them people would go, why is that one in there? And then the next person would go, that's the best thing ever, you should only do that. And when you have this personal kind of reaction to that, I think it's a little harder to have this mass thing that everybody's consuming, but everybody finds that thing in there that they want to have. And so then they become something different, right? Especially we see this in enterprise with VR. These bespoke uses for it, and as that keeps growing, we're just going to get more and more of those, not necessarily V1.
Just on the question of revenue and the killer app, I really don't think it's necessary. So to take another example from media before, The Great Gatsby is one of the biggest pieces of literature content in the States. It's treated as this big thing. When John Fitzgerald died, he was essentially super sad that his book that he wrote so long on wasn't a commercial success, so he only sold like 2,000 or 20,000 copies or something like that. So it was deemed a failure, and that shows that you don't need the commercial success to get recognized in the future for that piece of mind-blowing or game-changing content. So it's definitely not a thing. But yes, you need exposure, because if no one sees your great product or your killer app, then it might as well not exist.
Just very quick, what's the most amazing killer app as we are defining right now for you, what you've played in VR?
Did you say selfie tennis?
So far?
No. Well, plug in Julie. I think Tilt Brush is one of the most amazing things I've seen. And now Medium as well, right? They're of the same ilk. But Tilt Brush, even more so of how it is easy for kind of non-artists to be able to communicate, and then create something that other people then can experience and go through. And I think those kind of tools, and if anything, the killer app right now is probably Unity. While people use Unity and Unreal, that we have one of our coworkers, 14-year-old son, picked up Unity, started making stuff, put something up on Steam. It's now, like, I wish that was my allowance. So, you know, that's awesome that people can just do that. And there's these tools just to create. And there's something special about doing it in VR where you make it and then you put it in and you're in that world you just created.
Vlad, I'll let you
I think
because you're more not traditional gaming sort of. You
yeah, like
stuff.
the most interesting things I actually found is like more like abstract, like and some things which are not on Steam, like but hard to find. Like there is a whole scene of this indie VR porn guys who like just enthusiasts around the world doing stuff, but most of it is just broken and like garbage. But like I found they coming up with so many like innovative things. You like just because of their enthusiasm, it's like crazy. And this thing is growing, and also like I'm seeing some like what people doing in terms of interactions, and it also like had like developed some kind of trends and like. It's developing the language and people like go on there like, and I don't know, like for me, like it's not something in particular, but I really love like the various like experimental art games. I don't know, just like for example, Isaac Cohen, like Kabiba made like few really amazing games, which is like basically like abstract world and abstract interactions. And also there is an artist in the US, Sam Rolfs. He made like a lot of art like influenced by VR like last year. So I'm kind of more looking for these kind of things because apart from art, these people they bringing a lot of new ways of actually interactions, and they really developing this language like further because. Somehow they have an advantage of skills to do that. I found a lot of people who like just want to do something really fast and drop it in the store. It's like super obvious and like boring. There is nothing new. But like people who are really experimenting, they developing this whole like medium.
So we almost out of time. This one actually is a very straight, simple question. How long is a piece of string? What's the ideal VR duration of a game you should be looking at? I think it's pretty. Is there any? It depends on the type of games. I think this is. I know the answer to this, but I would love to hear you guys. And I've already said the answer at the beginning. How long is a piece of string?
I mean, it totally depends on the types of games. How engaging is the content? What kind of story do you want to tell? How intense is the experience, which is also super important. Yep. So I've seen people spending hours on end in Tilt Brush, for example, or Sculptor VR, because it's not a problem. It's easy on your senses. It's something creative where you can play around for hours on end. So as long as it's, and I mean, the simple answer is as long as it's engaging and not too intense, I think there's no real limit for a VR experience.
Yeah. Sarah, you spend what, 48 hours in VR? No, well, you've tried it, I think, as well, right?
I did 8 hours.
You did 8 hours. So, I mean, the question is very directed. Will we see a 7-hour game by remove the game bit? But will we see a 7-hour video game in VR?
I mean, you have to play nonstop, or do you take breaks? I mean, that's kind of how games are now. I like to go to the bathroom, so I'm probably not going to play 7 hours. But no, I mean, it's the same as any game, I think, right? I mean, I think those kind of experiences, some are super long. I know they're like, in Onward, there's guys who have, literally, they just must play every single waking moment because they have so many hours in that game. Yeah. So, you know, I think it's the normal breadth of the amount of time people put into different games, right? Yeah.
Right, so we pretty much, and I'll let everybody probably say whoever next the killer app should be in a summary, and we end the session. Vlad, we'll start from
I think the next killer app should be like something like really like exciting. Like if people would make like, I hope the people will make something more like VR only and like something like exciting. At some point, like a lot of games, they like people becoming like kids when you like playing in a physical space. So I think like people really have to aim that way.
What's your next game?
I would just say is, yeah, on Twitter you should follow Isaac Cohen's a good person to follow, Kavibo. And there's a community forming around that. Colin Northway is another good person. Colin's actually working on a project right now. Colin Northway worked on Fantastic Contraption. He's now trying to gather artists together and do some work together because some of this content is hard to discover or it's hard to stand on its own because it's a weird, crazy thing on its own. So instead of just you buying into that, you'll buy into this experience of a group of them and then you can kind of find different ones. So like following those guys is a great way to see what new cool stuff is because often people just then put a link to something that you can download and experience it that day.
Adding another great developer that you can follow is Marshmallow Laser Feast. So Barnaby Steel, they're also doing some great things. They just unveiled a super awesome tree hugging experience at Sundance, which sounds crazy at first, but it's one of those examples where you can really see what you can do if you're just tapping into the senses of people in a more direct way, which VR offers.
Yeah, well, so I would suggest hackathons and game jams for like most of the time, like just seeing what comes out and what idea is cool, and then just yeah, extend that, make like a real project or a game with a story behind it on a longer run, but just look for great ideas that really, really work and you really buy into them at like small game jams or something.
So what I concluded, and I hope you did as well, which should be empowering you, is that we don't know what the next, or we still don't think there's been a killer app as such. So you guys actually have that freedom of becoming that next killer app creator. I hope you gained some hints of what the next killer app will be, and I'm hoping one of you will be creating that. Thank you.